forgive me for this trap shit. Sergeant Smack make it backflip. Telly Hank did with the action. With the vital speaking Spanish. Frank Matthews, how I vanish. Poof. Came back like I'm King Tut. Gold BBS is on a beamer. When Fat Cat was 10 queens up. Ball off the profit, not the re-up. Fly like Puerto Rican Jesus. Uptown like I'm Baby May. Just caught a touchdown from the Bay.
More people under age 21 in Detroit have been shot in the first 10 months of 1986 than in all of 1985. More than 70 young people have been killed, a 10% increase from last year.
The drug trade has created new status symbols for Detroit youngsters.
The move to control handguns comes too late to keep 1986 from ending up the bloodiest year in a decade in a city where the death of youngsters contributes to the highest murder rate in the nation.
Even in so-called normal times, Detroit has one of the highest crime rates in the country. Now, a weekend attack by hundreds of youths has prompted authorities to focus on a particular segment of the city's criminal population.
On November the 3rd, 1901, Ford would open his second car company, the Henry Ford Co. Though he would leave the company a year later in August of 1902, and it would become the Cadillac Motor Company, Detroit would be America's 13th biggest city, with a population of around 286,000. On September 16, 1908, William Durant and Charles Stewart Mott would found General Motors in Flint, Michigan. On June 6, 1925, Walter Chrysler starts the Chrysler Corp in Detroit. 25 years from then, in 1950, Detroit's population would hit 1.85 million, making it America's fourth largest city. With 10,000 more manufacturing jobs, exactly 296,000, than the city would have residents in 1901. But just a few years later, by 1963, the city would lose approximately 150,000 of those same manufacturing jobs. Then by the early 1980s, Michigan would lead the nation in unemployment, as the recession and a surge of imported cars would cripple the state's automobile-dominated economy. And with those factory jobs that their mothers and fathers and uncles and aunts worked gone from the city, the drug game would come to town and be the younger generation's biggest employer.
There are a lot of other contributing factors. There is unemployment and underemployment. There was a time in Detroit when young people got out of school thinking that they could go into the factories and get jobs. They can't do that anymore. General Motors has closed most of its plants. Those jobs are gone. The factories are gone. The hope is gone.
In the same way that the car companies would begin to sprout up in the early 1900s, the same could be said about the drug gangs in the early 1980s. Similarly, other companies would see how revolutionary the assembly line that Ford used to dominate that industry was. The same could be said about the sales and marketing strategy of probably Detroit's biggest drug crew in size and possibly in wealth. YBI, or Young Boys Incorporated, is said to be founded by four guys: Baby Ray, Block, Butch, and Wonderful Wayne. Around this same time, it was swelled to hundreds of members, and by 1984 to 1982, they were rumored to have taken over the heroin trade in Detroit, controlling an estimated 80% of its sales, while making upwards of $300,000 a day during its heights. There are even claims that a future kingpin and a one-time young Big Meech. Even to this day, a lot of people believe that what made it possible for the crew to obtain this much success was the exact strategy that it used, and it was its workforce. Though evil, I'm not sure if it was genius or necessary, but with no factories to clock into anymore, YBI was like the new Ford. But by 1982, Young Boys Incorporated would begin facing turmoil and competition, and shootouts, backdoors, and indictments would close the curtain on YBI and open the door for the next big thing, the ponies.
Pretty good thing to be a kid here. Do you feel pretty good when you wake up in the morning that things are going to get a little better?
Not lately, no.
Why?
When I wake up in the morning, most of the time I do, I feel like that I go back to sleep because I know it's about, you might have to go to the store, you might have to go downtown, you might have to go somewhere, and it's about, putting your life on the line.
What kind of a city is it where you're going to go to the store and put your life on the line?
It's a dangerous city.
We sitting there playing cards, and then, boom, bullets just started coming from everywhere.
Tanisha Baldwin was killed when 5 men opened fire on the wrong house. She was 8. Willie Brown was walking past the house that night when he was hit.
To see your child laying there, and you know he's fighting for his life, it's an awful, awful thing.
Before the shooting, Willie had a steady job, decent grades, and a love for playing basketball. All gone now.
Hearing somebody tell you that you're not going to walk again, it's like...
Detroit in the early 1980s was the Wild Wild Midwest, as an article from the Detroit Free Press would read, killing somebody in Detroit in 1980 was easy, and in so many cases, senseless. Easy because of the 696 people slain in the Tri-County area last year. 482, slightly more than 69%, were killed with guns that were readily accessible. Pistols, rifles, and shotguns kept stuffed in belts or purses, dresser drawers, or closets at home, and even in glove compartments. Senseless because many were killed impetuously, the reason often minor and perhaps even forgotten after the heat of an argument.
We came from Hogan, Lord, me and a couple of my homeboys came down here one day and seen all these young guys with top 10s on and Adidas tracksuits. We was like, damn, what the fuck is happening?
After the December 7th, 1982 indictment was snatched, the leadership, including Butch Jones and Raymond Peoples, along with another 41 of their Adidas-wearing YBI members off the streets of Detroit. A 80% big void would be left open, and some say it would be to disassociate themselves from the group before them. But at some of the same places that you would see the kids wearing Adidas down, you would start to see kids wearing another up-and-coming brand.
Today, the game of basketball is played above the rim. High above the rim. And whether you're a big man or not, we invite you to take your game higher in Ponies, SST, and Collegiate, the first soft leather basketball shoes.
Pony Boys were pretty notorious too.
Now, did Pony come out of your YBI?
No. They quarreled. I don't know if they ever shot each other, but they probably shot at each other every now and then. But no, they were different. There was Leroy Buttram, who just passed away. We're almost the exact same age. I think he died 2 years ago.
Okay.
And his brothers, and then they had a lot of other guys, some guys from Chicago.
Okay.
So they were pretty notorious.
Not quite sure if it's because they operated around the same time, but one of the biggest misconceptions about Pony Down was that they were a derivative or that they came from YBI or Young Boys Incorporated. But another reason that some might believe that is because when YBI was indicted and swallowed by the federal government, it would be said that former YBI members would go on to join Pony Down. Not exactly how many, but that might have led to some of the confusion. But based on everything I researched, it seemed Pony Down started right around 1980. So that would be the fall of YBI, which hints to some of the rumors of people talking about the two groups shooting it out. And the group would be headed by Leroy Gun Buttram Willis, and with Detroit being a I am my brother's keeper type state when it comes to the drug game, with the likes of Big Meech and Terry, the Brown brothers, which would form the Best Friends, even the Powell brothers in somewhat similar times. Gun Buttram's brothers were said to play a prominent role in the organization, and they would be Walter, Tony, and Larry, who was said to be third in command in the organization. One of the biggest mistakes between the rivalry, or said rivalry, between Pony Down and YBI was the gear, with it almost being said or mentioned like Adidas was the preferred brand to YBI, which is not at all surprising, with at the time it being the probably most popular brand, as people would see them everywhere from tennis courts to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar skyhooking in them, to right around the same time to where they would cross over and be the go-to shoes of b-boys and breakdancers, and eventually be donned by Run DMC. And with it being said that Pony Down would model their sales or their sales strategy after YBI, the groups were more similar than they probably even knew. Pony Down was said to prefer and get their name from Pony, a footwear and clothing company that was founded in 1970 and headquartered in New York. Pony, which stands for Product of New York. Pony, a upstart brand that was specialized in sports, would give people an alternative to Adidas, which probably everybody had on, but ironically showing the similarities of the two groups. And like 100 Kanye West references, Pony would be founded by a guy by the name of Roberto Mueller, but it would be financed by a chairman from Adidas by the name of Horst Dassler. And I guess even kind of more ironically, years after Kanye would rap that shit, he would have one of the top selling shoes on Adidas, right alongside that shell toe that YBI would wear. And just like they would consolidate some of YBI's remaining workers, they will also consolidate their customers and consolidate their spots. And according to a Detroit Free Press article from November of 1985, that just 1 year after their rivals was taken off the streets in 1983, that Leroy Gun Buttram and the crew was already grossing around $100 million annually. And with the coast clear of rivals, the crew probably could have operated a lot longer if it was not for them being associated with beating a rival dealer to death, or the September 1983 kidnapping of one of their 2.5-year-old relatives. Now, with the kidnapping and ransom situation enough to raise suspicion to police, but they really didn't have to worry about it, because when a police monitored $100,000 ransom drop-off was being made, Leroy Buttram's brother Walter, along with another relative by the name of Darryl Young, would try to gun down the person collecting the ransom payment. And you probably think the kidnappers would go on to eliminate the 2-year-old after that shit. Completely wrong. He would be dropped off unharmed at a fast food restaurant not long after that shootout. And even though they don't get mentioned with the more violent crews in Detroit, in a 1983 interview with a local DPD officer, he would say, quote, "They just pull up to the street corner and shoot at the remnants of YBI who were still working. They're crazy. They all think they're Al Capone. And wilding like that, they wouldn't last on the streets much longer than YBI, as in 1985, they would be hit with a 35-man, 50-count indictment. The documents would even show that they had a wrecking crew unit just to handle drama. And even though they would be tied to several homicides, mainly one in May of 1983 of a guy by the name of Douglas Pace, most of the crew would be snatched up in 1985, but Leroy Gun Buttram would go on a run, and it would be several months before federal authorities would catch up with him in Detroit on I-94. He would only be sentenced to 6 years for running a Pony Down crew. And just like when their predecessors, YBI, got snatched off the streets, when they did, it was a vacuum, and Detroit probably even got more deadlier.
Detroit has had the unhappy distinction of being America's youth homicide capital. In fact, in 1986, the rate of murder amongst young people was twice that of even the closest other city, which happened to be Los Angeles, where there's been so much gang warfare.